Okay, so tonight, instead of doing the halachas and Siman base about chatzitza in tvilas of kelim, what we'll do instead is review some of the concepts of building a mikveh, what it entails. We'll review a little bit of the concepts, the musagim that we've covered in Hilchos Mikvaot, more or less of an overview or a summary about the main points that need to be kept in mind or addressed when building a mikveh, things that we need to be aware of. So in general, we're dealing with an area of great importance in Judaism, so much so that the Halacha says you build a mikveh before you build a shul. As we may have explained, that a shul you can have in your living room, and a mikveh not so easily can you have one in your living room, even though it's possible, but meaning that you invest and take action immediately to put together a mikveh, because that is of great urgency. Whereas a shul is important, but you can have a shul put up anywhere. And traditionally, our forefathers, our grandmothers were always very, very devoted to this. Taras HaMishpacha, family purity, never minimized it, because it meant that either you could have a future generation or not. Either you can live together or not. In other words, can you have a normal Jewish home or not? And they took great efforts to travel, if necessary, to reach a kosher mikveh, because otherwise Jewish life would be very difficult, very cumbersome. So building a mikveh was always a priority. However, in some places it's easier, in some places it's more difficult. As we covered the halachas a little bit about whether one can immerse in an ocean, in a river, lake. What's the difference between a mikveh and a mayon, a spring? And what happens if there's no rainwater altogether? Can you use snow? So these are some of the issues that we addressed, and they all come up. You know, we may be able to put together a mikveh engineering-wise, architectural-wise, as long as you have the money, which, by the way, is another important detail in building a mikveh, and that takes a while. You know, until we get the money together, build a beautiful mikveh. It's not cheap if you want to do it right. But there's other concerns too. And some of the concerns revolve on the actual design. What's the best design for mikveh? There's several designs. And what one has to be careful in building the mikveh to avoid, because you can easily invalidate a mikveh if you do the wrong thing. So what we'll do is we'll just go over some concepts and see how they relate to mikvahs. Number one, the tvila itself, the immersion of the mikveh, is something that not only applies to a woman during the time that she's menstruating, that she's a Niddah. It's also important for men at certain times. It was very important in the past when Am Yisrael was involved with the halachas of Tumah and Tahara, that they needed to make sure that their kelim were clean. It's also important today for gerim, those who are converting, and it's important for kelim that we buy, made out of metal or glass. Certain kelim require tevila as well, depending on its use and how it will be used. So mikveh is very important today, and it has various applications. However, there is a difference in what is required. Traditionally, sometimes what would be required is not a mikveh, but a mayon, a spring, or maim chaim, living waters as it's called. If you would be preparing the efer of the porah aduma, the ashes to sprinkle on somebody that was unclean, depending on who would need it, a zov, different levels of tumah, they require different things. And there are different conditions, or different requirements, I should say, as to what is needed for a mayon and what is needed for a mikveh. Basically, the difference between a mayon and a mikveh is in the amount of water, In Mayan, you don't really have to have that much water coming out. According to most poskim, even though we're machmer, to require of a Mayan like in De'ari, the Mikvaot Ari, which really functions like a Mayan, that it should have 40 se'ah, and we'll talk about that 40 se'ah in a minute. But basically, the halacha is that a Mayan does not require 40 se'ah. In other words, in principle, you can get away with a little bit of water coming out. Now, it's obviously it's going to be difficult for you to cover yourself with a little bit of water. But we're talking about you have water to cover yourself, but you don't have 40 se'ah. You don't have to be worried, in the Torah at least, if you don't have the 40 se'ah with a Mayan. With a mikveh, you need 40 se'ah. The second difference is that a Mayan can be zoichalin. Zoichalin means that the water can be moving, can be streaming, can be flowing, and it usually does. So that's good, that's okay, it's acceptable. With a mikveh, you're not allowed to have waters that are flowing. If you have that, you're going to have a problem. How could it happen that a water in the mikveh is flowing or moving? If you have a leak. Now, even though there's different opinions as to how big of a leak it has to be in order for it to be called zoichalin, some say it has to be that you can recognize, you can see it. Some say no, even if you can't notice it right away, but you've measured, the next day you see that it's lower. That's no good. That means your mikveh that has to be be'ashboiren, ashboiren meaning stationary water, is no longer a valid mikveh. It's invalidated by becoming zoichalin. This could be a problem when you have a filter or a drain, I should say, at the bottom of a mikveh. Today we have pumps, and the pumps is definitely the way to go if you want to empty a mikveh. Because if you're going to have that drain, well, what's happening in the drain? You have water moving from the mikveh to the drain. That's zoichalin in a sense. So if you can get the mikveh water out with a pump, that's the best way to get the water out. And you do want to clean the water from time to time. Filter out, clean it, replace it.
So now, how is getting it out with a pump not zoichalin?
Because you do it once. Once nobody's there. Nobody's there. You just get it out, you clean it, and that's it.
So with a drain, you can also do.
Well, obviously, it's possible, but this is always the issue, or the possibility of it draining, of the water exiting the mikveh without you being able to control it.
Is that the issue on zoichalin, the ability to control?
Well, no.
Is that
Zoichalin is just simply that the waters of the mikveh, which are supposed to be stationary, are somehow flowing.
But the distinction
flowing
between
out.
the drain and the pump is that one we have control and one we don't.
Well, with the pump, you basically, you determine when you're going to do it. You're going to clean it out at once in such a way that it's not going to be a problem during the rest of the time when people are immersing there. And there could be other problems in a mikveh that contribute to a potential zoichalin, like seepage.
Well, that was Rashi's mikveh, right? From the it was near the Rhine River.
Right.
So the level in his mikveh, I think in the village or whatever where he was,
yes,
the level would change depending on whether it was winter or summer.
Right.
Because of those strong rainfalls, the river.
Right.
So they had actually water seeping into.
And that could be a problem with mikvahs next to a river.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the problem they have.
Sure, exactly so.
And I think it was Rashi Dafka Paskins that it's not kosher if that happens.
Yeah. Now there is one advantage to having a mikveh in a place where there's a spring, and actually many chachamim in the past insisted on having that, because you would have the advantage of this being water from a mayan,
sure,
and having to be concerned that you have 40 se'ah or not, or cleaning it, right, or leakage. With a river, it's different. I'm going to get to that in a moment.
Right. Yeah.
But with a Mayan, you wouldn't have the problem of a zoichalin. We just said.
It's moving, it's okay.
Exactly. So imagine having continuous water, not having to worry and waiting for rain. Building a mikveh, therefore, in a place where there is a spring, if you had to dig just a little bit, not too deep, would be a great solution for several of the problems associated with mikvahs, with the building of mikvahs. So they did attempt to build mikvahs wherever there was a spring. For that reason, you would solve several problems. One of them being the hashboren, the potential for zoichlin, and for arboim saw, in case you didn't really have it. Even though today we insist on having 40 saw, still, you would be better off building it in an area that is a mayan. So a river is not a mayan, or is it? That's a big machlokes. If you recall, we talked about that. It all depends. Does that river dry up in the summer or not? If it dries up in the summer, then what you have is mostly rainwater. If it's mostly rainwater, the way we learn that Gemara, then you can't have it flow. If you want to use a river, what would be for the solution? You would have to fence it off somewhere on the side where the waters can collect and be rendered a mikveh. Otherwise, it's a question. I mean, if the river is as many rivers are, where the majority of that water that's flowing through is spring water, if it's continuously flowing, it is spring water, it's underground water, right? Then even though you may have rain coming in, the question was, do you have more rain than the spring water? Well, there's a good chance you have more spring water than you have rainwater. So then that river really would be a mayan, and mayan is kosher b'zoichlin. So with rivers, we'd rather avoid, unless we know for sure it's like a mayan. A lake is okay. How about an ocean? So we said, even though ocean is not a mayan, it's called a mikveh, but it's okay. It's an exception. What do you have to be careful with if you go to the ocean? That you have another woman check to make sure that she immersed properly, she did everything correctly. And obviously, you don't want to be seen by people. So if you can find a place where you're not going to be seen by people, it's going to be discreet, it's going to be done correctly, somebody's going to see that the woman is doing it right, then if there's no other choice, it's okay. It's not the first choice. It's dangerous too, in the ocean. But it is acceptable if there's no other choice. We spoke a little bit about snow, ice. There are times that snow can be transported. What's the problem? We run into a problem of she'uvim. Is this called mayim she'uvim or now, even though now it's snow or ice? And we said, it's okay, but it has to be transported in a certain way. So if we want to make a mikveh, the question is, can you make a mikveh initially with snow? Because we know that once you have 40 se'ah, you can add as much tap water as you want. So to supplement a mikveh is not the question. The question really is always, how do you start off building a mikveh from scratch if you don't have any rainwater? Also, you have to be concerned about the 3 lugin, which we're going to get back in a moment. If the mikveh already has some mayim she'uvim in it, the amount of 3 lugin, or the mikveh does not have 40 se'ah yet, and 3 lugin fell into it, it's a problem. You invalidate the entire waters in the mikveh. So you have to be careful with mayim she'uvim if the mikveh does not yet have 40 se'ah. We spoke about not being toivel in kelim, in vessels, for other reasons. And there's a problem of haviyoso al yedei tahara, or haviyoso al yedei tuma, an important condition in the making of the mikveh, that it should not be made in any way that involves kelim that are mekabel tuma, which really touches on pipes. After all, you're going to have gutters many times, transporting the water directly from the roof into a mikveh. So we make them of plastic, and we attach the pipes to the wall. Once a pipe, which by the way, if it does not have 4 sides to it, if it's just a plain pipe, it's not a real kli, right? A pipe can be used to transport, but if it's attached to the ground, or attached to the walls, which means the same thing, it's a big plus. Once something is attached to the ground, it cannot become a keli. We don't want there to be a keli because we don't want any waters entering the kelim to become she'uvim. So we want to avoid she'uvim along the way. You want to therefore avoid elbows, if at all possible, in the process. And that everything should be on a slant so the water should not collect at any given place. It should be made of materials that are not mekabel tumah. As we said now, it should be haviyoso al yidei tahara, not haviyoso tumah. In the making of the mikveh, there should be nothing that is mekabel tumah. So aside from the problem of she'uvim, of containers that would render the waters being collected as mayim she'uvim, you don't want it to be formed through tuma, through kelim that are mekabel tuma. Even though they're not real kelim per se that would render the mayim she'uvim, but it's happening through metal. Metal is haviyos al yidei tuma. So you want to use plastic pipes that are connected to the walls, to the ground, in such a way that it's batal karka. Then we have the concept of hamshacha, very important concept, which really helps us with mayim she'uvim, and it's used many times in mikvaot today. Hamshacha is where the waters are allowed to flow on the ground for the distance of about 12 inches, 3 tfachim. The hamshacha takes care of she'uvim. We hold as long as you don't want to make the whole mikveh of hamshacha. You don't want to take mayim she'uvim and just let it flow on the ground a half a mile away until it reaches the mikveh, because technically that's called hamshacha. It was, you start off with mayim she'uvim, which are pasul, but you made hamshacha, and hamshacha fixes mayim she'uvim. But you don't want to do the entire mikveh like that. So if you have the majority of the mikveh mayim she'erim, and you have a little bit that you're doing through hamshacha, that's okay. However, the hamshacha should happen on cement that is porous, that is absorbable. Absorbent. Thank you. And in this way, the opinions are that this is a real hamshacha. In other words, it's not happening in something which is not porous, which is more like, it's not really the ground. Something that is absorbent is more like the ground. So they use a certain type of absorbent cement. So the location of where the waters will flow into the mikveh, right before the mikveh, there may be a patch of cement, whether it's on the roof or whether it's on the floor, on the ground, that would be big enough to allow any waters that are entered to me to go through the hamshacha. So many places they implement this whether you're having mayim she'uvim or not, just to be on the safe side. There are many chumras, and this is one. So that you can have, in case there was any she'uvim, those she'uvim went through hamshacha. So you may notice that in the pipings, you may notice it in where the water actually enters the mikveh, that there's a few inches of hamshacha. But speaking about the 40 se'ah, about the amount, I said 200 gallons, but it does vary. It could be a little bit less, it could be a little bit more. You know, you don't want to be skimpy if you can at all. Have a large mikveh where you have enough water according to all the shitas. That's the best. But obviously there are certain situations where you don't have that much rainwater, so we need to know what the minimum is. 40 se'ah is about that, about 200 gallons, give or take, of rainwater.
I think that was the one in Westwood where we saw the mikveh.
Yeah.
They actually had on the roof a thing to capture rainwater, and then they had these pipes going down to the bottom.
Could be. Yeah.
I think that's why we went there, because we wanted to see how they constructed that.
Yeah, it has to be done right. Yeah, that it's not catching in such a way, and it's something that is called a keli.
Right,
and
so
especially if it's
all the way
tuma,
from the roof, we went all the way down, following
directly.
the
Not having any place where you can stop. Yeah. All right. Then we have the concept of hashaka, which we're going to get back to very soon. We gave an example of mikvaot, the way they're built, but the concept of hashaka is where the two bodies of water are kissing, touching, where there is a chor, a hole between the two borders, keshfoferet anod, if you recall that term, the size of 2 fingers that can rotate easily. It's between 1.5 and 3 inches, depending which sheet you
The
hold.
nod was a kind of a leather pouch that they used to carry liquids.
And it was like a opening.
Right.
And there's shitas of how much that is, between 1.5 and 3 inches. I say about 2 inches. All right. So that can bring about hashaka, where the 2 bodies of water, which we'll talk about soon, can connect. And that is usually through shoferes anoid. That's what is the requirement.
Do you have any idea how they come up with this particular measure? Is that like Moshe Sinai or?
Yeah, sure, it is. Sure, definitely.
So it would be difficult to find any rational reason.
Shoferes anoid is most shitas hold that that's halacha leMoshe Sinai. That's correct. All right, we're not going to go into too much into shinoi mareh. We covered about the change of colors, whether it was wine or milk or paint and things like that. Obviously, the water should retain its original color. It could be a problem if it's not. Okay, as far as the types of mikvois, how should it actually be done? There are several concerns. We're not only concerned about having enough rainwater. Even if you have enough rainwater, how many times can you use it? It's going to get dirty. And if you empty it, clean it, who says you're going to get new rainwater right away? That's one issue. There are other issues, other potential problems, as that we said before. It could seep out, so you can have a problem of zeichlin. You may not have 40 sa'ah when you're dipping in. So what's important is from time to time for someone to check the level. And they have different color tiles. You may have noticed in the mikvois, they have, at least according to some, they suggest to do that. If you have different color tiles below the hole or below the level of 40 sa'ah and above, you can notice more easily if it's gone down.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is something to check from time to time. Do you still have the level of 40 sa'ah? Not only because you need 40 sa'ah, but you don't want it to be a problem of zoichalin. How do you check if there's zoichalin? This is one way. Did it go down? Well, why did it go down? Because maybe people were splashing around. Maybe. I mean, it could be.
In the men's mikveh, you often have children come in and they use it as a little swimming pool.
Yeah, so it all depends, how it happened. But you have to check it. So anyway, you basically have, let's say, 3 kinds of mikvois. One is called a mikveh that is based on oitzer zriya. One is called a mikveh that is based on oitzer hashaka. Right? And then you have a mikveh that has 2 oitzoros. And you have the Chabad mikveh, which you have one bore over another bore. But it's important just that we be familiar with what Zriya and Hashaka really is, because that's what most mikvois, that is the way they are made. So what is Oitzer Zriya? We briefly spoke about it. It involves a bore, a pit full of water, rainwater, that you're not going to use to immerse in. You don't want to dirty it. But what you're going to do is, once you have reached the 40 sa'ah requirement in this Oitzer Zriya, you're going to start filling it up with faucet water. Now, as it is, faucet water coming through the city pipes could be acceptable in some ways as a form of amshacha. But we're not going to get into that right now. Let's assume it's Maim She'uvim right now. Any of the tap water that is going into the Oitzer Azriya, what happens to it? It becomes nizra. It becomes sewn into it. That's what Zriya means, to sew. In other words, you're sewing the tap water into the rainwater. You're mixing them. So you're taking tap water and basically making it kosher for a mikveh. Afterwards, after it's all mixed, You empty it out. That zriya, through a hole, empties out into a bor tvila, where people are going to immerse in.
Now, why is that not tzarich?
No, after it's filled up, that's it. You close it. In other words, you took tap water.
So the transfer from one bore to the other is okay.
Yeah, but all you did was allow it to flow in, fill up from the oitzer zriya into the bor hatvila, a mixture of rainwater and tap water, and you shut off the oitzer zriya. You don't want to dip in there. So what do you have right now? You have kosher water in this bor hatvila, and you don't have to use the oitzer zriya to dip in. It's clean. It's rain. Follow me? That's called oitzer zriya. So they're nizra, they're sown in them, and they're kosher. How do they get from the oitzer zriya to the bor hatvila? Through a hole. In this way, what do you accomplish? In this way, you could clean as many times as you want the bor hatvila. You empty it out. You fill in more faucet water into the oitzer zriya. You are basically kashering the new tap water, and again, let it through.
So eventually, the majority will be tap water.
Oh, that's what the Chazon Ish says. That's what some say. It's not maybe such a good idea. Not everybody would agree that if eventually all the original rainwater is gone, then it should still be possible to do. That's one of the disadvantages, according to those opinions who say that we have to be concerned about the eventuality. That is similar.
Certainly the ratio between tap water and rainwater is constantly, each time it's refilled, being changed.
That's correct.
And there's no way to prevent it eventually becoming majority tap water.
And that's a concern.
So the ones that disagree with this concern, what do they say to that?
Not everybody holds that it's a problem.
Yeah, well, how do they explain it away?
Yeah, no, because you've mixed it. If you have mixed it,
so
once you have an
tap water has also become mikvah water. Didn't we learn that it's kosher for dipping, but if you add too much water to the
but that's the concept of noisen se'ah v'noitel se'ah. That's similar, right? That you take you're putting in and you're taking out. You're putting in and you're taking out.
You're doing it.
And eventually, maybe you're going to get rid of all of it. Yeah, that's definitely an issue, and that's brought up and
like
it's
an
mentioned.
machine.
Yeah. But there are many shittas that hold that it's okay to do that, and not only is it okay, this is according to them, this is a very good way to build a mikveh through an oitzer zriya. You avoid many problems. We're gonna soon talk about the pluses and the minuses of each shita. Let's go to oitzer hashaka. Oitzer hashaka you may have seen, because that's more readily observed, is where you have one bore that has rainwater, 40 CO or more, and they remain there. They remain in their natural state. They're not touched. They remain in that bore for a long time. Then they fill up the second bore adjacent to it with regular tap water. Then they make a hole. And remember we said that? You open it and you allow the two waters to touch, to kiss. Are you allowed to close them after they touched? That's another machlokes. A lot of shittas are machmir to keep them open all the time. Even though if you keep them open all the time, that may dirty the waters in the oitzer hashaka. But that's what some people do. They keep them open all the time.
Well, there will be an exchange between the waters.
Yes, it's connected. It's continuously connected. Some say you don't have to.
Ultimately, again, it'll average out.
No, because you close it off. You don't really.
If you close it off, it's something else. If you're the ones that leave it open.
Right. But it takes a lot longer, and there are ways around it. Let's put it this way: it's less of a problem than with the oitzer zriya. But you understand the way this works.
Sure.
You have two bodies of water, You don't use the one that has the rainwater, you use the one that has the tap water, but the tap water has become kosher for mikveh simply because of the hashaka between the two. As long as the hole is big enough, the hole is clean, nothing got in the way, the two of them connect, it's all like, they all become like rainwater. The shach is one of those shitas that holds that you should leave the hole open all the time. Yeah. All right, so what's the milas of each one, or the chisroinus? What's the mila of oitzer azriya? Well, first of all, the waters are always clean. All the waters are always clean because you're always putting in clean water. You're mixing it with the original rainwater. And that's very good. The waters are always clean. Now, there's a big advantage if there's seepage. Let's say there's seepage in the oitzar of the rainwater. It's leaking, and it does happen. It can happen. Where the rainwater is, it's seeping, it's leaking. The mikveh water, where the people will immerse, will continue to be kosher because it's not connected anymore to the oitzer azriya. What happens in the oitzer hashaka? If the oitzer hashaka, if any of them is leaking, but even if the oitzer hashaka is leaking, because it's connected to the borat vila, it is as though both of them are leaking. And you may not realize this, you may not notice this. You can see immediately an advantage that the oitzer azriya has over the oitzer hashaka. Seepage. If you're connected, oh, that's so nice that you're connected, but whatever happens here is happening here at the same time. With the oitzer azriya, not so. You've poured the water here. The oitzer azriya is now disconnected. It's no longer a problem, even though there may be seepage there. What's the chisroinus of oitzer azriya? The chisroinus are, first of all, that it's only a good method of building a mikveh according to the majority of poskim who disagree with the Raavad. Remember the Raavad? The Raavad is pretty much the shita that holds that if you don't have roiv mei geshamim, like Ilan was saying before, at any given time in the mikveh, in the oitzar, you can't kasher the mikveh. You can only do so by hashaka. You cannot use zriya to be metaher maim she'uvim unless at any given time you have at least the majority of megashamim there, and eventually you're not going to have it with oitzer zriya. So you could use oitzer zriya in the beginning, but according to the Raavad, eventually you're going to run out of roiv megashamim. All right, what else? What is another chisaron of oitzer zriya? The bore where you're being toivelin, before you connect or before you pour the water from the oitzer, it has to be completely dry. Many times when they clean it out, there's some water left behind. That water that's left behind is maim she'uvim. And that maim she'uvim, because of the water that they cleaned with the hoses or whatever water they use as maim she'uvim, if it's there before the waters come down, it's going to be a problem. So it is possible that if you have oitzer zriya, if you're using oitzer zriya, that there could be, when you're in the process of cleaning it, some 3 lugin or so of maim she'uvim that will pass in the mikveh. All the wetness and the cleaning and so forth will leave behind some waters. And as we said before, there can be some cracks in the oitzer where the water will seep out. And forget about zoichlin, you may not have 40 cell. So when the people that come to change the water are going to open up the faucet into the oitzer azriya, what are they going to be doing? Pouring maim she'uvim into a board that does not contain 40 cell. So forget about Zoichlin right now. Zoichlin, you don't have a problem in Oitzer Azriya if it's not happening in the Bora Tvila. But you are, if you're going to have a seepage where the water level is going to go down, the people who are going to open the water are not going to know that. They didn't check. They're going to just open the water again into the Oitzer Azriya, and there's not 40 se'ah there. So this are some of the concerns in Oitzer Azriya. What are the milas of Oitzer Hashaka? First of all, the waters in the Oitzer Hashaka with the rain are always there. You always have what you need. And therefore, this is kosher even according to the Raivet. With Hashaka, you don't have a problem of it being replaced. Even though Ilan is somewhat right, the Chazon Ish points out that even with Oitzer Hashaka, maybe eventually, if you leave the hole open for long enough time, that the waters will mix. I think it will take longer, but according to the Chazon Ish, it also could be a problem. But not everybody seems to be concerned about that. With Oitzer Hashaka, you don't have the problem. You don't have to clean out the mikveh when you're changing the water, because you're gonna kasher anyway through Hashaka. As soon as you open up the hole of Hashaka, they're just going to connect. So it doesn't make a difference what you have there. If the Oitzer Hashaka drips or seeps out, you will notice it more readily because the two mikvots are connected. So it will be more readily noticeable. What are the chisroinas of Oitzer Hashaka? The rainwater in the Oitzer Hashaka are not so clean. Because they're there for a long, long time. They're sitting. It's the original rainwater. And what you have here is through that hole you're having some used water getting mixed in too. So the original rainwater is going to get a little bit dirty. That's one disadvantage. And as we said before, with the Oitzer Hashaka, if you have seepage, it will automatically invalidate the Bora Tvila because it's happening, they're connected. So what happens here is happening here. So if you're having the problem of Zoichalim in the Oitzer Hashaka, you're going to have the problem of Zoichalim at the same time in the Bora Tvila. And it could also happen that the hole in between them gets dirty, and it's not Keshvaferes Hanod. That is a possibility that it gets filled up with all kinds of material, and then its size is diminished from Shoferes Hanod. That's also a possibility. So what do? You build two Oitzaros. And you will see the better mikvois have Oitzer Zriya and Oitzer Hashaka. And in this way you can overcome the disadvantages of both. It's important basically to always be on the lookout in the various phases of construction and after the fact. That the mikveh, even though it may have been kosher at one time, still continues to be kosher. Otherwise it can present a problem, of course, more for women than for men. Because for men, it may be even possible for them to dip in a swimming pool.
How does that work?
And even a shower, if you have a certain amount of water coming down, Tisha Kabin Maim She'uvim is going to be good enough for certain applications. But not for a woman, not for a Niddah. The requirements are stricter.
Now, what does the shower actually accomplish by a man? Under what circumstances would it be sufficient?
For what he needs, for what the for the needs of a man, that would be sufficient.
So for a Kohen who's doing...
Yes, exactly.
For a Kohen doing work at the Beis Hamikdash, that would be sufficient?
No, not the Beis Hamikdash.
Not the Beis Hamikdash.
Yeah, no.
So also eating truma and so on.
Right, no, not for that, no. For what the purpose, for what we need today, to be clean.
So this is what we need
a man who's married, for tefillah and so forth. Yeah. So anyway, depending on what the needs are, the requirements are different. Mayan still appears to be the best. If you're able to construct a mikveh close to a Mayan, then of course a lot of the issues are resolved naturally. What is that?
Mayan has to be naturally occurring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you can't make one in your backyard. You can't.
Exactly. Yeah. You would have to dig for it, and in some places, I believe, like you were saying, on the East Coast, maybe.
Good question.
Yeah.
For a Mayan, does it have to be naturally occurring, or can you create a Mayan by digging or doing something to force the water out of the ground?
You can. Yes, you can.
So
You can tap onto a Mayan. And some, depending on the pressure, on how much and how deep it is, if the pressure is good enough, you would get new waters coming into the mikveh from the Mayan. That's the way it was done. So there's no doubt about it that if you live next to a place where you can have easy access to a Mayan versus rainwater, you're definitely better off. There's a lot more advantages according to everyone. I mean, you still want to have the required amounts, but several of the issues that are real issues are resolved. I mean, you don't have a problem with Zoichalin. And even technically with the 40 you don't have so much of a problem. Maim She'uvim is not so much of a problem. Even though, I mean, we're obviously machmer. If you notice in the Mikvaot, we were pretty machmer in many things, in many areas. If you can, but you still need to know what the halacha is in the event that you have to go b'di eved.
Is any underground source of water considered to be a Mayan?
Well, that's what you have to know, if it's coming from the river or not. No, the answer is no, because waters close to a river are not necessarily from a Mayan. So that would be something to consider. That would be something to check out if you're close to a river. If you're not close to a river and you have water coming up from the ground, then you're lucky.
Okay.
And if you have oil coming up from the ground, maybe you're even luckier. Yeah. Anyway, historically, they built mikvaot just about anywhere they were in the desert, Masada and so forth. And they had to be sometimes very ingenious in how to bring about how to get the waters there, how to make it kosher. I mean, there's no Mayan there. So you would involve rainwater. If it would involve rainwater, you would have to know how to channel it in such a way that it would be somewhat kosher, I say. Because you may have to employ some level of amshacha, to kasher it. And obviously the tools and whatever kelim that are built into the mikveh would have to be such that are not mekabel tuma either, and that there's no real kelim involved, so there's no she'uvin. But even if there was a little bit of a problem with she'uvin, that's where hamshacha comes in and saves the day. So it's important to be aware of all the facets when you're building it, the tiles you're using, how's the water getting into the mikveh, what is it going through, and making sure that you always have the right amount and looking out for any problems that can occur later on, whether it's in the cleaning or whether it's any seepage that may be occurring. Sometimes you may have to drain out all the water and start all over again, in order to have a completely kosher mikveh. Okay, let's start.